ladies and gentlemen. It's Ukrainian talk show on Pod TV. My name is Sasha Star, and today I have a distinguished guest, Dr. Jonathan Lockwood. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Sasha. Glad to be here as always.
Yeah, I yesterday for some reasons I've listened to second or third time interview with Stephen Kotkin by the name. It's a Hoover Institute by the name Five Questions to Stephen Kotkin, and surprisingly, I'm impressed third time just as I was first and second time. And what's interesting is that um, he's talking a lot about the points of a possible peaceful regulation between Russia and Ukraine, and his position is very similar to yours, which you quite a few times already announced on this program. What he's saying is that let's imagine that one or another. Yeah, now interview is 1 year old, okay, but still it's so relevant today. I'm really amazed. What he's saying is imagine that one way or another Ukraine will take over all its territories as of 1991. Does that mean the end of the war? Does it mean the victory for Ukraine? And his answer is not at all, because nothing will prevent Russia for the next several months or even a year or longer to collect all their forces, to bring multi-million people army with all the ammunition and so on, and start a new attack against Ukraine, and maybe much more ferocious. That was one in 2022. Okay, let's take another scenario. Let's see there is an armistice, and as a result, they say 20% or so of territory is going to Russia. First of all, let's be realistic about something. Is it going to be really a Russian territory? Not at all. People will still be very resentful of what happened to them. Same as even if you take Crimea, which Russia already has for 8 years. And are people in Crimea very happy with the Russian rule? Absolutely not. They are, and I don't understand how Russian people benefit from having Crimea when they have to supply almost everything what they need just to exist. On the other hand, as a result of that, losing, say, 20% territory or so, and most likely temporarily, it's not that they lost territory and they will never get back, but temporarily, yes. However, the remaining 80% would be joined European Union and NATO. So therefore, now they're under umbrella that Russia cannot any longer make any demands or attacks or just anything. Jonathan, is it very similar to what you just saying?
It is, with the exception of Ukraine accepting for long any kind of ceding of Ukrainian territory to Russia and allowing them to get away with that. Now, in line with that, I was going to mention an article I very recently read, matter of fact, today, I believe, in which the Observer is pointing out that Russia has been attempting, unsuccessfully, I might add, to disrupt or prevent Ukraine from making use of Elon Musk's Starlink satellites to support its own war effort. And that is very much in line with Russian strategy for the past several decades. What they have been doing is the Russians have been emphasizing two main areas of strength. One is their nuclear weapons arsenal, and the second is their space presence. What they are doing, they do not have a space control strategy, although they did toy with the idea briefly of creating their own space fleet back in the 90s. What they are practicing right now, in effect, is what I call a space denial strategy. It is very similar. You can compare it to Nazi Germany's strategy of sea denial during World War II. They did not want to control the seas. They wanted to disrupt Allied control of the seas to prevent the United States from reinforcing Great Britain and using it as a staging ground for the eventual invasion of Europe. That was the whole objective of Nazi Germany's sea denial strategy, using U-boats and their land-based aircraft and commerce raiders, which they essentially use their fleet for, commerce raiders. But now the Russians are attempting, when they see, for example, what we call the U.S. Space Force. U.S. Space Force, according to the open press, consists of 80 satellites. Okay, from the Russian and the Chinese perspective, that is not a space force because there's no space fleet. What they see there, when they look at the U.S. Space Force and the U.S. space infrastructure, they see a set of 80 targets which need to be disrupted. In the same manner, they look at Elon Musk's Starlink satellites, which ostensibly are for commercial use, but which can also be used for military purposes, by other parties. And so the Russians see Elon Musk's Starlink satellites as also a set of targets that need to be disrupted or jammed or destroyed if need be. And so far, according to the article, the Russians have been notably unsuccessful in preventing Ukraine from being able to make effective use of these Starlink satellites. So we see an illustration of Russia's ongoing strategy of space denial, coupled with its emphasis on trying to gain as much political and military leverage from its nuclear arsenal as possible. So they're trying to threaten the West and coerce them, make them fearful of escalation, while at the same time, the Russians, as I have stated prior, are very fearful, although they don't come out and say it, their actions and their other words bear out the truth of it, is that they are terrified of the potential of American technology in cooperation with its NATO allies to create a global ballistic missile defense that will eventually neutralize the one thing that makes Russia a great power. So I see these developments, notably Russia's lack of success in disrupting Ukraine's ability to use space, is a very positive development. And so, they're despite the, shall we say, the conventional wisdom propaganda, that everybody wants to be on the right side, and they're fearful of being caught out wrong. And you and I and Yvonne are notably in the minority, and that we are being in a sense relentless optimists, in that we are looking at the aspects of the conventional argument that, oh, Russia is going to win, it's going to be a long war, they're going to grind Ukraine into the dust, totally disregarding the lessons of previous decades and previous Russian-Ukrainian conflicts. And so I look at this. I look at the current developments. They're coming together more slowly than you and I would like, but they are the various NATO nations are contributing, albeit in a piecemeal, apparently uncoordinated fashion. Because, mind you, keep in mind, nobody expected this scenario to begin with. You can tell we were all caught off guard by this, but the NATO nations have been seeing collectively bilaterally their own enlightened self-interest in preventing a Russian victory in Ukraine, and they are coming to Ukraine's aid. The key variable in all of this, Sasha, is how is Ukraine's ability to adapt, to improvise, and to integrate what help they get into creating an effective defense. So far, the answer is yes. They have been very effective. And despite the looming possibilities of shortages or cutoffs of aid, again, the U.S. political system, as messy as it is, it was designed to be that messy. Yeah, the founding fathers, although they did not necessarily envision a scenario like we have here in the 21st century, they did nevertheless realize the need for ambition to counteract ambition, for the United States not to be able to react too swiftly in one direction or the other. And that is why this coming November, you are going to see the messiest presidential election probably in U.S. history. It's going to be brutal. It's going to be messy. But I predict that it will be, the ultimate result will be proof that the system does in fact work.
Very interesting, because I'm thinking about scenarios where the losing side will pretend that they won election, and they could mobilize their supporters in believing that they won, but they were denied. Similar scenarios to what Trump is saying during his rallies, election was stolen. And so in this case, it was not stolen, it was taken away, it was something else. And don't forget that in January 2021, if in place of Mike Pence, there would be some other person acting as a vice president, and he may or he could follow Trump's instruction and delay and essentially put the phony electors and essentially completely distract the victory of Joe Biden. It could have happened. It was just almost an inch from that to happen, simply because of just one man, Mike Pence, in my opinion. If it would be somebody else in his place, it might as well be he would agree to postpone and then all the history would be very different. How you read this situation, John?
I read it as just another indication of messy American politics, and believe Churchill once remarked that the system of government in the United States is probably about the worst form, except for everything else.
Very well said, John. Thank you. And it's just although a hair of different outcome, but it still worked its way.
And I must point out that the late President Ronald Reagan stated that every 4 years, what we regard as normal in the United States, the transition of power every 4 years, the relative peaceful transition of power, is regarded as nothing less by the rest of the world as a modern miracle. It is a miracle which has been taking place consistently for well over 200 years. And in order to break from that pattern would take an enormously perverse series of events, which I do not believe are going to happen in this upcoming presidential election. As messy as you or I might think it would be, it will still work.
Yes, I totally agree with you. Now, the Ukrainians, essentially, with their heroic resistance, but you must admit that they have no choice as to.
Well, they don't. They have to take the tools that they have been given. You have to fight the war with the tools you have, not with the ones you wish you had. Now they can do their planning and integrating as best they can, and they are using all of the diplomatic and economic and other persuasive tools that they have at their disposal to try and pull in as much aid as possible. Now all of this makes for an unprecedented situation, really, in which Ukraine must successfully integrate, improvise, and, if necessary, create the conditions for a successful counterpunch, which will throw the Russians off balance, an asymmetric response, which will enable the Ukrainians to regain the military initiative, in accordance with what Mr. Zelensky wants. He has stated that he wants to regain control of Crimea during 2024. That is a very logical, plausible, and attainable objective, because there are growing significant vulnerabilities in the Russian military posture, both in the Black Sea and well as potentially emerging regaining by Ukraine of air superiority over Ukraine with the qualitative introduction of various other types of aircraft. It's not occurring in as clean and organized and rational a fashion as you and I would like, but I might point out an observation by a German officer, Wehrmacht general during World War II, where he said that afterwards he said the reason the American army is so successful in wartime is that war is chaos, and the American army practices chaos on a daily basis. True, still true. If you ever have the privilege of visiting the Pentagon, you're witnessing chaos in action. It is. It is not as orderly and neat a process in the Pentagon as outside observers might think. They might think it's a war machine, but they The principal American skill, as one Army officer, my fellow Army officers observed, is that we are very skillful at killing people and breaking things.
I remember after, I think it was 1870, when Germany defeated France, and General Bismarck said that this war was won by German school teachers. And
no, Sasha, when I was growing up, I went to my parents sent me to a Missouri Synod Lutheran church. And I was from kindergarten through 6th grade. All of my teachers, and I remember their names too, very clearly after all these years, they were all first or second generation Germans. And boy, and with the consent of the parents, they were all authorized to use physical punishment if need be. Or if they didn't want to do the physical punishment themselves, they would simply send the offender to the principal's office, where he applied the Board of Education, a real wooden board for a paddle, applied to the seat of the pants. And that sort of discipline left me with a permanent mental condition known as respect for others.
Yeah. Actually, Germans were famous for use of physical force in education, and you'll be surprised, even in the music, where great composers, they were taught rules of music theory and composing or so on. The physical punishment was definitely a big part of it, and results are quite great. Most of the great composers are Germans.
Okay,
but what's happened with German school teachers in the First and Second World War? Somehow,
I don't know.
It didn't work as well as
no. A few bad apples. A few bad apples slipped through the cracks.
Yeah, they started to use more Hungarian teachers and some others, and obviously, the point on their education has deteriorated.
Back to a more fun subject, like the Ukrainian war.
Yeah.
The Ukrainians, as much as you and I might be getting rather nervous looking at the course of events or looking at the relentless Russian attacks, but the observers are also, the outside observers are also noting the Russians are continuing to pay a very high cost in terms of men and materiel for these attacks, and the quality of these people. Quality of these troops is not going to go up over time. It is going, if anything, is going to decrease. And you'll notice that the Russians are not drawing their conscripts, at least not yet, from the Russian people proper. The Russian peoples in around Moscow and the main districts. They want to avoid that, because once that happens, and Putin's main constituency all of a sudden starts having to go into the battle, then you're going to have a full-scale revolt.
Yeah, and don't forget also that Ukrainians are learning more and more to inflict damage to Russian-located targets.
Right.
And they're getting more and more successful, and even less of the targets from Ukrainian borders. So sometimes now we're talking about 1,000 kilometers and more, and they're using their own build missiles.
Right.
So they don't NATO doctrine and the US that, you should not use this to attack Russian located targets. Okay, we are not.
Actually, the Ukrainians are following what the principles of what the U.S. used to call in its doctrine air-land battle and the deep strike and deep interdiction. The Ukrainians are simply taking a leaf from the U.S. book, and they are in the absence of being supplied the means, they are creating their own means for deep strike and interdiction and what's called the deep battle, and being able to interdict and disrupt the enemy's rear areas and their logistics operations. And keep in mind, logistics has never been a strong point of the Russian army.
No.
And this war is simply exacerbating that weakness.
and that logistics problems, they're starting from Napoleon's war, and it was the Second World War. It was logistics, and First World War again, and even today. Now, what's interesting is that not a while ago, General Zaluzhny, he said that he underestimated the resources to continue the war, given the fact that 330,000 Russians were eliminated, killed, or whatever during this war. So, if you remember, in Afghanistan's war, Soviet Union lost 15,000 people in 10 years, and it was one of the reasons why Soviet Union fell apart. And here we're talking about 330, it's 20 times as much in less than 2 years. So his estimation was that because there are more and more families in Russia who lost their fathers, their brothers, their son, and it will eventually, people in Russia will become very unrestful about the war, and there will be so much against it, but it's not happening. And this is a paradox which difficult to explain.
It is really it is a facade of strength that Russia is portraying right now, projecting, and it is a very brittle. They are strong but brittle, and they are relying very heavily on their apparent a strong nuclear missile force. It's an open question as to just how reliable that nuclear missile force is. And matter of fact, even the Federation of American Scientists have said that quite a number of the Russian nuclear warheads are obsolescent or due to be decommissioned. And there's also the open question that the Russians have been devoting notoriously a low amount of resources to maintenance and upkeep of these nuclear forces. The United States devotes much more monetary resources to the upkeep and making sure that all of our nuclear missiles work. And when called upon, they will all fire. They will all find their targets. As for the Russians, well, that's an open question. And that is also why, given the fact that the Patriot has demonstrated how effective it is and how the U.S. Military-industrial complex is continuing to develop laser weapons and other types of weapons which would increase the effectiveness of our ballistic missile defense. I have said that, and I have no public knowledge of this, I have simply stated publicly that the logical thing for the United States and its now NATO allies to do would be to execute an asymmetric response. Do not build more nuclear weapons. Build a ballistic missile defense that is capable of neutralizing the other side's ballistic missiles. And once that is done, guess what? Well, if we construct an effective global ballistic missile defense, thereby giving ourselves and our NATO allies an effective shield, well, then what about Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran? Will they be able to construct a shield in imitation of us? No, they don't have the resources. So the end result of our building a global ballistic missile defense system will be we will have a shield, the other side will not have a shield. And that basically results in strategic supremacy over our opponents and the ability to create a prolonged period of peace and stability, because simply the other side's nuclear weapons, their symbols of great power, will have been neutralized.
And this is a very scary thought for Russian generals.
Oh, yeah.
Just very scary.
Yeah, I'm going to, basically I would be say, I know what I would be saying to the Russian leadership. I would be saying to them all, if I could have a platform to say it from, it might as well be this show. I know what you fear. The words they want to hear the least. I know what you fear.
Jonathan, and Patriot missiles, this is not even today. It's about 1960.
Yeah. It was. Now, here's the funny thing. The Patriot was not originally designed to be a ballistic missile defense system. It was designed to be the ultimate aircraft killer.
Mhm.
The Patriot is capable of achieving speeds of Mach 6 and can execute the missile itself can execute 30 G turns. That is
Mhm.
way faster and way more maneuverable than no aircraft in existence can outrun a Patriot or outmaneuver a Patriot. And so when you have now, I discovered it's beautiful serendipity when I was the Brigade S2 of 10th Air Defense Artillery Brigade, Hawk and Patriot in Germany back in the 1980s. I was talking to a Raytheon contractor, and he told me about the fact that the Patriot had its own built-in anti-ballistic missile defense capability. But it was designed at the time to defend for the BMD capability was designed to defend the Patriot system itself against missile attack by the Soviet Union. And specifically, it was designed to defend itself against the SS-21,
Yeah.
a short
Yeah.
range ballistic missile with a range of about 120 kilometers, and whose firing arc fell well within the Patriot's radar envelope. The Patriot would be able to see that missile attack coming and could easily intercept a missile being fired at that range. Now, when the Patriot, back in Operation Desert Storm, when the Patriot system was sent to Israel and to help defend Israel against ballistic missile attack, remember that the primary missile system that Iraq was using was the Scud, which
Yeah.
had a longer range. Theoretically, that missile was outside of the Patriot's envelope. And so, in the most brilliant bit of improvisation, in history, essentially we used our satellite system to, whenever a Scud missile was launched, we would tell them, okay, here's the missile that's been launched. Point your radars in this direction. So that this was all while the missile was being launched. So the Patriot could now see the Scud missile coming. That gave the onboard computer time to compute an intercept course and fire and intercept the Scud. Wonderful bit of improvisation.
Yeah. Don't forget that Scott was not smart missile. It was
No, not at all. It was a completely dumb missile. Could not maneuver. Could not do anything. Heck, it could barely stay intact in flight. And so it was relatively easy to intercept. The only problem was the Patriot was simply designed to intercept and knock the missile off course. From the Patriot system's point of view, okay, mission successful. It's not going to hit me. But they needed to improve the capabilities of the Patriot, which Raytheon promptly did over the ensuing years, to where now the Patriot has a near 100% virtual intercept rate against Russian ballistic missiles or even other so-called types of invincible hypersonic missiles, supposedly. So given that demonstrated potential, if you augment that, I contend if you augment that capability, U.S. and NATO, with an augmented space force that includes a space fleet. Basically it's the Pentagon saying to Elon Musk, "Hey, Elon, we'd like to buy 12 of your Falcon 9s, 12 of your Falcon Heavies, and 12 of your Starships. We'll add weapons, equipment, and crew. And we've got an instant space fleet. And oh, by the way, how would you man this space fleet? Because it's going to require a U.S. Space Force with its own space fleet will require highly skilled technical people in order to be the crew of those starships. Well, where do you think we can get them from? Our NATO allies. Our NATO allies all have very capable, intelligent, well-educated personnel who would make wonderful members of an allied U.S. Space Force. And this would be a very solidifying factor of strategic stability for the U.S. and its NATO allies. We would be able to impose strategic stability for not only decades, but potentially centuries to come.
Jonathan, I really wish that we may not know about it, but Americans already building something similar to what you just discussed. and
we ha-
hopefully we'll find
we
out
have
about it.
we have a history. We have a history of pulling off little surprises of that
That's
nature.
right.
But again, that is what I have just described for you is what the Russians that is what they fear most. The Americans applying their technology in such a way as to neutralize the one factor that makes Russia, and for that matter, China,
And
North Korea,
remember,
Iran, worthy of any notice.
they have just a pathological fear of name Patriot missiles. That
Mhm.
name
Ever since
alone instills enormous fear in the Russian psyche.
did you know that the word patriot in this case of the weapon system is actually an acronym. It stands for Phased Array Tracking Radar in on Target.
Very interesting, because a patriot is actually in Russian language. There is a word patriot, means the man who loves his country, and patriotic people were like, remember Patrick Morozov, Pavel Morozov, who denounced his father as the enemy of the state.
Oh yeah.
And Pavlik Morozov, until very recently, or maybe even still, he's regarded as a great patriot of the Soviet Union. So the name patriot is very scary in many
Oh yeah.
ways.
Oh yeah. It scares them. Sasha, again, just based on as far back as I looked, the Soviets, the Russians, have been terrified of the Patriot system ever since January 1985, when I saw that article and my brigade commander asked me to see, hey, are the Russians saying anything about Patriot? And I looked, and sure enough, there was January 1985 issue of Vestnik Protovazhnoye Obrony. And they thought at that time, the author thought that the Patriot was intended to be a strategic defense anti-ballistic missile system for the defense of the United States. They thought, in effect, they thought that Patriot was the leading edge of Star Wars, of the Strategic Defense Initiative, which nothing could be further from the truth. It was an exaggeration. The Patriot had, as you have noted, was built and developed from 1960s technology. And ever since then, the Raytheon has been able to incorporate much more up-to-date technology to make Patriot even more fearsome.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I remember there was a huge noise when there was a decision to locate some Patriot systems in Poland about 20 years ago or so.
Because
and
it
there was
threatened their leverage.
Absolutely. And Americans were telling them that this is not attacking means, but rather defending. And they're not even defending against Russian ballistic systems because they're flying completely different direction. They're not flying over Poland. They're flying over the North Ocean, right, directly through Canada and then United States. So this Poland-based Patriot missiles have nothing to do with that. They are to defend against Iranian possible attack. So then they could be quite fundamental to defend European targets from Iranian missiles or so on. But Russians wouldn't believe. They said, no, you can.
Well, from their perspective,
adopt them.
From their perspective now, given the Patriot's demonstrated capability to intercept ballistic missiles, the Patriot could credibly threaten to block a significant portion of a Russian nuclear missile strike against NATO. That's what they fear. It threatens their leverage. It threatens their power. It does not threaten a single Russian life. It threatens their power to destroy. That is what they fear. Without that, they are simply castrated.
Well, Jonathan, thank you so much for today's program. Wish you and all our listeners good weekend, and we'll see you same place, same time on Tuesday. And hopefully we'll have some even better news from Ukraine. Slava.
I'm confident of that.
Okay. Bye-bye, everybody.